Drawing open the curtains, he discovered that Deborah's was a corner room whose windows looked out across Central Park to the apartment buildings on the east side. The daffodils and the leafing of the trees still had 3 weeks to work their way up to Madamascar Falls, but Central Park could have been Savannah. The panorama Debbie had teased on, but he'd still take the shore any day. What had he been doing in a forest on a mountaintop? When he'd fled Nicky's disappearance, he and Rosanna should have gone to Jersey to live by the sea. Should have become a commercial fisherman. Should have dumped Rosanna and gone back to sea. Puppets. Of all the fucking callings, between puppets and whores, he chooses puppets. For that alone he deserves to die. Only now did he see the assorted pieces of Deborah's underwear strewn about at the foot of the bureau as though she had just hurriedly undressed, or been undressed, and run from the room. Pleasant to imagine. He could only guess that he had already been into the underwear during the night. He had no recollection. He must have got up in his sleep to look at her things and spilled some onto the floor. Deep into self-caricature now. I am more of a menace than I realize. This is serious. Premature senility, senilitia, dementia, hell-bent for disaster, erotomania. And what of it? A natural human occurrence. The words rejuvenation. Drenka is dead, but Deborah lives, and round the clock at the sex factory the furnaces are burning away. As he dressed in what he wore wherever he went day in, day out, frayed flannel shirt or an old khaki T-shirt, baggy bottom-heavy corduroys, he listened to hear if anyone was home. Only 8:15, but already emptied out. He could not at first choose from what lay on the floor between a black underwire bra and a pair of silk floral bikini underpants. But thinking that the bra, because of the wiring, might prove bulky and draw attention, he took the panties, shoved them into his trouser pocket, and dropped the rest in the piled-up drawer. He could play there again tonight, and in the other drawers, and in the closet. He noticed now 2 sachets in that top drawer, one of mauve velvet that was lavender-scented, and one of red gingham, giving off the crisp odor of pine needles. Neither was the smell he was looking for. Funny, modern kid, Dalton graduate, already a connoisseur of the Metropolitan's Manets and Cézannes, yet didn't appear to have the slightest understanding that what men pay good money to sniff is not the needles of the pine. Well, Miss Cowan will find out one way or another, once she starts wearing this underwear to something other than class. Old salt that he was, he made up her bed square and tight. Her bed. 2 simple words, each a syllable as old as English, and their power over Sabbath was nothing short of tyrannical. How tenaciously he clings to life, to youth, to pleasure, to hard-ons, to Deborah's underthings, and yet all the while he had been looking down from the 18th floor across the green tinge of the park and thinking that the time had come to jump. Mishima, Rothko, Hemingway, Berryman, Kessler, Pavese, Kosinski, Archil Gorky, Primo Levi, Hart Crane, Walter Benjamin, peerless bunch. Nothing dishonorable signing on there. Faulkner as good as killed himself with booze, as did, said Rosanna, authority now on the distinguished dead who might be alive had they shared at AA. Ava Gardner, blessed Ava. Wasn't much about men could astonish Ava. Elegance and filth immaculately intertwined. Dead at 62, 2 years younger than me. Ava, Yvonne De Carlo, those are role models. Fuck the laudable ideology. Shallow, shallow, shallow. Enough reading and rereading of A Room of One's Own. Get yourself the collected works of Ava Gardner. A tweaking and fingering lesbian virgin, V. Wolfe. Erotic life, 1 part prurience, 9 parts fear. An overbred English parody of a borzoi, effortlessly superior as only the English can be to all her inferiors who never took her clothes off in her life. But a suicide, remember. The list grows more inspiring by the year. I'd be the first puppeteer. The law of living, fluctuation. For every thought, a counter-thought. For every urge, a counter-urge. No wonder you either go crazy or die, or decide to disappear. Too many urges, And that's not even a tenth of the story. Mistressless, wifeless, vocationless, homeless, penniless, he steals the bikini panties of a 19-year-old nothing and, riding a swell of adrenaline, stuffs them for safekeeping in his pocket. These panties are just what he needs. Does no one else's brain work in quite this way? I don't believe that. This is aging, pure and simple, the self-destroying hilarity of the last roller coaster. Sabbath meets his match, life. The puppet is you. The grotesque buffoon is you. You're Punch, schmuck, the puppet who toys with taboos. In the large kitchen with the terracotta floor, a kitchen ablaze with sunlight on polished copperware, robust as a greenhouse with gleaming potted plants, Sabbath found a place set for him at the table, facing the view. Surrounding his dishes and cutlery were boxes of 4 brands of cereal, 3 differently shaped, differently shaded loaves of hearty-looking bread, a tub of margarine, a dish of butter, and 8 jars of preserves, more or less the band of colors you get by passing sunlight through a prism, black cherry, strawberry, little scarlet, all the way to green-gauge plum and lemon marmalade, a spectral yellow. There was half a honeydew as well as half a grapefruit, segmented under a taut sheet of saran wrap, a small basket of nippled oranges of a suggestive variety he'd not come across before, and an assortment of tea bags in a dish beside his place setting. The breakfast crockery was that heavy yellow French stuff decorated with childlike renderings of peasants and windmills. Quimper, beyond the quimper. Now why do I alone in America think this is shit? Why didn't I want to live like this? To be sure, producers characteristically provide for themselves more like pashas than transgressive puppeteers do. But this is awfully nice to wake up to. Pocketful of panties and jar upon jar of Tiptree preserves. Affixed to its lid, the little scarlet sported a price tag reading $8.95. What have I achieved that could possibly quimper? It's hard not to be disgusted with yourself when you see a spread like this. There is so much, and I have so little of it. There was the park again, out the kitchen window, and to the south the spectacle of metropolitan spectacles, midtown Manhattan. In his absence, while up on a northern mountain Sabbath futzed away the years with puppets and his prick, Norman had grown rich and remained an exemplary person. Link had gone nuts, and Nicky had, for all he knew, become a bag lady shitting on the floor of the 42nd Street subway station. 57 years old, gaga, obese. Why? He would cry. Why? And she wouldn't even know who he was. But then she could as easily be living in a Manhattan apartment as large and as luxurious as Norman's, with a Norman of her own. She could have disappeared for as ordinary a reason as that. It's the shock of seeing New York still here that's reminded me of Nicky. I will not think about it. I cannot. This is the perennial time bomb. Strange, the one thing you never think is that she's dead. That even goes for the dead. Me, up here in the light and the warmth, and fucked over as I am with 5 senses, a mind, and 8 kinds of preserves, and the dead, dead. Immediate reality is outside that window. So big it is, so much of it. Everything entangled in everything else. What large thought was Sabbath struggling to express? Is he asking, whatever did happen to my own true life? Was it taking place elsewhere? But how, then, can looking out of this window be so gigantically real? Well, that is the difference between the true and the real. We don't get to live in the truth. That's why Nicky ran away. She was an idealist, an innocent, touching, talented illusionist who wanted to live in the truth. Well, if you found it, kid, you're the first. In my experience, the direction of life is toward incoherence, precisely what you could never confront. Maybe that was the only coherent thing you could think to do. Die to deny incoherence. Right, Ma? You had incoherence in spades. The death of Morty still defies belief. You were right to shut up after that. You think like a failure, Sabbath's mother replied. I am a failure. I was saying that to Norm only last night. I am at the very pinnacle of failure. How else should I think? All you ever wanted were whorehouses and whores. You have the ideology of a pimp. You should have been one. Ideology, no less. How knowing she had become in the afterlife. They must give courses. It's too late, Ma. The black guys have got the market cornered. Try again. You should have led a normal and productive life. You should have had a family. You should have had a profession. You shouldn't have run away from life. Puppets. It seemed a good idea at the time, Mother. I even studied in Italy. You studied whores in Italy. You deliberately set out to live on the wrong side of existence. You should have had my worries. But I do, crying again. I do have your worries, exactly. Then why do you go around with an altacaca's beard and wearing your playground clothes and with whores? Quarrel, if you like, with the clothes and the whores, but the beard is essential if I don't want to look at my face. You look like a beast. And what should I look like? A Norman? Norman was always a lovely boy. And I? You always got your excitement in other ways, always. Even as a tiny child, you were a little stranger in the house. Is that true? I didn't know that. I was so happy. But always a little stranger, making everything into a farce. Everything? You, of course, look now, making death itself into a farce. Is there anything more serious than dying? No, but you want to make it into a farce. Even killing yourself you won't do with dignity. That's asking a lot. I don't believe anyone who kills himself with dignity. I don't believe that's possible. Then you be the first. Make us proud. But how, Mother? Beside his place setting was a longish note beginning, "Good morning," in caps. The note was from Norman, computer-generated. "Good morning. We're off to work. Link service begins at 2. Riverside at 76th. See you there. We'll save a seat with us. Cleaning woman, Rosa, comes at 9. If you need her to wash or iron anything, just ask her to. Need anything, ask Rosa. I'm at the office all morning, 994-6932. I hope sleep restored you some. You're under tremendous stress. I wish you would talk to a psychiatrist while you're here. Mine's no genius, but smart enough. Dr. Eugene Graves, surname unfortunate, but gets the job done. I phoned him, and he said you should call if you want to. 562-1186. He has cancellation late this afternoon. Please consider it seriously. He got me out of my summer mess. You could be helped with medication and by talking to him. You're in bad shape and you need help. Accept it. Please call Jean. Michelle sends her regards. She'll be at the service. We expect you to have dinner at home with us tonight. Quiet, the three of us. Until you're back on your feet, we expect you to stay. The bed is yours. The place is yours. You and I are old friends. There aren't that many left. Norman. Paperclip to the note. There was a plain white envelope, $50 bills, not just the 6 that would have covered the check from the joint account that Sabbath had made payable to Norman the evening before, but 4 more in addition. Mickey Sabbath had $500, enough to pay Drenka to fuck in a threesome if Drenka, well, she wasn't. And since chances were Norman had no intention of cashing Sabbath's check, probably already had torn it up to ensure Rosanna wouldn't get screwed out of her share of the dough. Sabbath had only to hurry, find one of those check-cashing places that take 10% for commission, and write out a new check for $300 on the joint account. That would give him $770 altogether. Suddenly he had 30 to 50% less reason to die. First you make a farce of suicide, now again you make a farce of life. I don't know any other way to do it, Mother. Leave me be. Shut up. You don't exist. There are no ghosts. Wrong. There are only ghosts. Sabbath proceeded then to enjoy an enormous breakfast. He hadn't eaten with such pleasure since before Drenka had taken ill. It made him feel magnanimous. Let Rosanna have the $300. Deborah's furrow was now his furrow. Michelle, Norman, and Dr. Coffin were going to put him back on his feet. Graves. After packing himself full as a suitcase so stuffed with clothing you can't zipper it shut, he rollingly strolled around the apartment in his old sailor's gait, inspecting all the rooms, the bath, the library, the sauna, opened all the closets and examined the hats, the coats, the boots, the shoes, the stacks of sheets, the differently colored piles of soft towels, wandered down the hallway lined with mahogany bookcases holding only the world's best books, admired the rugs on the floor, the watercolors on the walls, scrutinized the Cowans' quietly elegant everything. Lamps, fixtures, doorknobs, even the toilet bowl cleaners appeared to have been designed by Brancusi, all the while devouring the hard heel of the seeded pumpernickel plastered thick with little scarlet at $8.95 a jar and pretending that the place was his. If only things had been different, everything would be otherwise. His fingers still sticky with the sweet jam, Sabbath ended up back in Deborah's room, sifting through the drawers of her desk. Even Sylvia had them. They all had them. Just a matter of finding where they stashed them away. Not even Yahweh, Jesus, and Allah had been able to stamp out the fun you can have with a Polaroid. Gloria Steinem herself can't do it. In the contest between Yahweh, Jesus, Allah, and Gloria on the one side, and on the other side the innermost itch that gives life its tingle, I'll give you the 3 boys in Gloria and 18 points. Now where have you hidden them, Deborah? Am I hot or am I cold? The desk was a big oak antique with polished brass handles, originating probably in the office of some 19th century lawyer. Unusual. Most kids like the plastic crap. Or is this what's called camp? He began removing the contents of the long top drawer. 2 large leather-bound scrapbooks with dried leaves and flowers pressed between each pair of pages, botanically beguiling, delicately done, but you ain't fooling anyone. Scissors, paper clips, glue, ruler, smallish address books with floral design covers and no addresses as yet entered in. 2 gray boxes about 5 by 6 inches, Eureka! But within, only her personalized stationery, mauve like the lavender sachet. In one box, some handwritten sheets folded in 2 that looked promising momentarily, but were only the drafts of a poem on love unrequited. I opened my arms, but no one saw. I opened my mouth, and no one heard. You have not been reading your Ava Gardner, dear. Next drawer, please. Dalton yearbooks from 1989 to 1992. More teddy bears. 6 here plus 8 in the wicker basket. Camouflage. Clever. Next. Diaries. The jackpot. A stack of them bound in cardboard with colorful flowery designs, very like those on the underpants in his pocket. He took them out to whimper. Yep, matching underpants, diaries, and address books. The kids got everything, except, where are the pictures hidden, Debbie? Dear Di, I find myself becoming more and more drawn to him, trying to work out my feelings. Why are relationships so hard? Why not write about fucking him? Hasn't anybody at Brown taught you what writing is for? Page after page of crap, quite unworthy of her, until he came upon an entry beginning, as the others did, Dear Di, but divided by a ruled pen stroke into 2 columns, one labeled My Strengths, and the other labeled My Weaknesses. Something here? He'd take anything by now. My strengths: self-discipline, my backhand, hopefulness, Amy, Sarah L., Robert, ? Non-smoker, non-drinker. My weaknesses: low self-esteem, my serve, infatuations. Mother: low self-esteem crossed out. Robert, 4 exclamation points. Too emotional, impatience with mom, thoughtlessness with mom. My legs: butting in, not always listening, eating. Whew, this is work. A thin 3-ring notebook with a college decal on the front, and beneath it a white label on which was typed Yates, Elliott, Pound, Tuesday, Thursday, 10:30, Solomon 002, Professor Kransdorf. In the notebook were her class notes, along with photocopies of poems that Kransdorf must have distributed to the class. The very first was by Yates, called Meru. Sabbath slowly read it, the first poem he'd read by Yates, and one of the last he'd read by anyone since leading the life of a seaman. Civilization is hooped together, brought under a rule, under the semblance of peace, by manifold illusion. But man's life is thought, and he, despite his terror, cannot cease ravening through century after century, ravening, raging, and uprooting, that he may come into the desolation of reality. Egypt and Greece, goodbye, and goodbye Rome. Hermits upon Mount Meru or Everest, caverned in night under the drifted snow, or where that snow in winter's dreadful blast beat down upon their naked bodies. No, that day brings round the night, that before dawn his glory and his monuments are gone. Debbie's notes were written on the sheet directly below the poem's date of composition. Meru, Mountain in Tibet, in 1934, W.B.Y., Irish poet, wrote Introduction to Hindu Friend's translation of a holy man's ascent into renouncing the world. K. Yeats was at the verge beyond which all art is vain. The theme of the poem is that man is never satisfied unless he destroys all that he has created, e.g., the civilizations of Egypt and Rome. K. The poem's emphasis is on man's obligation to strip away all illusion in spite of the terror of nothingness with which he will be left. Yeats comments in a letter to a friend, "We free ourselves from obsession that we may be nothing. The last kiss is given to the void. Man equals human." Class criticized poem for its lack of a woman's perspective. Note unconscious gender privileging, his terror, his glory, his phallic monuments. He ransacked the remaining drawers, letters to Deborah Cowan dating back to grade school. Perfect place to hide Polaroids. Patiently he went through the envelopes. Nothing. A handful of acorns. Postcards, blank on one side, reproductions on the other. The Prado, the National Gallery, the Uffizi. Box of staples, which he opened, curious to see if this 19-year-old girl who pretended to love flowers and teddy bears best of all might be using the staple box to secrete half a dozen joints. But only staples were secreted in the staple box. What's wrong with this kid? Bottom drawer, 2 ornamentally carved wooden boxes. Nope, nothing. Doodads, tiny beaded bracelets and necklaces. Braided hairpieces, headbands, a hair clip with a black velvet bow smelling of nobody's hair, smelling of lavender. This child is perverted, but the wrong way. The closets packed, pleated skirts with floral prints, loose silk pants, black velvet jackets, jogging suits, tons of paisley kerchiefs on the overhead shelf, big baggy things that looked like maternity dresses, short linen dresses with her legs, size 10. What size was Drenka? Could no longer remember. Loads of pants, corduroy, blue jeans galore. Now why does she leave at home all her underwear and all her clothes, jeans included, when she goes to school? Does she have even more stuff there? Are they that ostentatiously rich? Or is this what privileged girls do? Leave it all behind, rather the way certain animals, to mark their terrain, leave behind them a trail of pee. He went through the pockets of all the jackets and all the pants. He searched among the heaps of kerchiefs. By now he was getting good and angry. Where the fuck are they, Deborah? The drawers. Calm down. There are still 3 drawers to go. Since he'd been in the top, the underwear drawer, more than once already, and since he was beginning to feel the pressure of time, his plan was to get downtown before the funeral to visit the site of his first and only theater. He skipped to the 2nd drawer. It was hard to pull the drawer open, so stuffed was it with T-shirts, sweatshirts, baseball caps, and socks of every variety, some with slots of different colors for each of the toes. How cute. He plunged right through to the bottom. Nothing. He worked his hands in among the T-shirts. Nothing. He pulled open the drawer below. Bathing suits, all kinds, a delight to touch, but he'd have to examine them more exhaustively later. Also cotton flannel pajamas with nice things like hearts printed all over them, and nightgowns with ruffled hems and lace trim, pink and white. Back to them, too. Time. And there were not only T-shirts on the carpet by the dresser, but skirts and pants on the floor in the closet, kerchiefs all the way over on the bed. The desk a mess, drawers all open, and her diaries scattered across the top. Everything to be put back with fingers that were now killing him. The bottom drawer, last chance. Camping equipment, Varney sunglasses, 3 pairs without cases. She had 3, 6, 10 of everything, except. And there it was. The gold, his gold, at the bottom of the bottom drawer where he should have begun in the first place, in among a jumble of old school books and more teddy bears, a simple Scotty's box. Design of white, lilac and pale green flowers on a lemony white background. Each box of Scotties offers the softness and strength you want for your family. You're no fool, Dee. Handwritten label on the box read, "Recipes. You cunning girl. I love you. Recipes. I'll give you teddy bears up the kazoo. Inside the Scotty's box were her recipes. Deborah's sponge cake, Deborah's brownies, Deborah's chocolate chip cookies, Deborah's divine lemon cake, neatly written in blue ink in her hand, a fountain pen. The last kid in America to write with a fountain pen. You won't last 5 minutes in Bahia. A short, very stout woman was standing in the doorway of Deborah's bedroom, screaming. Only her mouth was she able to move. The rest of her appeared to be paralyzed with the terror. She was wearing tan stretch pants stretched to their limit and a gray sweatshirt bearing the name and logo of Deborah's University. In a large, broad face excavated by irregular patches of pockmarks, only her lips were prominent, elongated and sharply etched, the lips of the indigenous, as Sabbath knew, south of the border, down Mexico way. The eyes were the eyes of Yvonne de Carlo. Nearly everybody has at least one good feature, and in mammals it's usually the eyes. His own were thought by Nicky to be his arresting feature. She made much of them back when he weighed 70 pounds less. Green like Merlin's, Nicky said, back when it was all still play, when she was Nikita and he was Agape Mu, Mihalaki Mu, Mihalio. Don't shoot! No shoot me! 4 childs! 1 here! She pointed to her belly, a belly as pierceable as a small balloon. No shoot! Money! I find money! No money here! I show money! No shoot me, mister! Cleaning woman! I don't want to shoot you, said he, from where he was seated on the carpet, the recipes in his lap. Don't scream! Don't cry! It's okay. Gesturing jerkily, hysterically toward him, toward herself, she told him, I show money. You take, I stay, you go. No police. All money. You. She motioned now for him to follow her out of Deborah's defiled room and down the book-lined corridor. In the master bedroom, the big bed was yet unmade, books and nightclothes flung to either side of it, books strewn about the bed like alphabet blocks in a baby's playroom. He stopped to examine the book jackets. How does the educated rich Jew put himself to sleep these days? Still Eldridge Cleaver? John Kennedy, Profile of Power. Having Arce, the Delaney sisters' first 100 years. The Warburgs. Why don't I live like this? The bed sheets weren't worn and antiseptic white like those that he and Rosanna slept at either edge of, but glowed warmly, pale golden pattern that reminded him of the radiant glory of the October day up at the grotto when Drenka had run roughshod over her own record and come 13 times. More, she begged, more. But in the end he fell back with a terrible headache and told her he couldn't continue risking his life. He seated himself heavily on his haunches, pale, perspiring, breathless, while on her own Drenka took over the quest. This was like nothing he had ever seen before. He thought, it's as though she's wrestling with destiny or God or death. It's as though, if only she can break through to yet one more, nothing and no one will stop her again. She looked to be in some transitional state between woman and goddess. He had the queer feeling of watching someone leaving this world. She was about to ascend and ascend, trembling eternally in the ultimate, delirious thrill. But instead, something stopped her, and a year later she died. Why does one woman love you madly when she swallows it, and another hate your guts if you suggest you even try it? Why is the woman who swallows it with rapacity the dead mistress, while the one who holds you to the side so you squirt your heart out into the air is the living wife? Is this luck only mine, or is it everyone's? Was it Kennedy's, the Warburgs, the Delaney sisters? In my 47-year experiment with women, which I hereby declare officially concluded, and yet the colossal balloon that was Rosa's behind piqued his curiosity no less than the pregnant belly did. When she bent to open one of the master bedroom bureau drawers, he remembered back to his initiation in Havana, the classic old brothel where you go into a salon and the girls are marched in for the clients. The young women came in from wherever they were lounging around, wearing nothing resembling those baggy garments in Deborah's closet, but all in skin-tight dresses. What was amazing that while he chose Yvonne de Carlo, his friend Ron, he'd never forget this, chose a pregnant one. Sabbath couldn't figure out why. Then, when he grew more knowledgeable, the opportunity strangely enough, had never come his way. Till now. She thinks I've got a gun. Let's see where this leads us. Last time he had anything like as much fun was watching Matthew split Barrett's skull open instead of his own. "Here," she pleaded. "Take, go. No shoot me. Husband, 4 childs." She had opened a drawer stacked about a foot high with lingerie, not the hot stuff that the kid had ordered from some mail-order catalog, but smooth, lustrous, and perfectly piled. Collector's items, and Sabbath was a collector, had been all his life. I can't tell a pansy from a marigold, but underwear. If I can't identify it, nobody can. Rosa gingerly lifted from the drawer a generous helping of nightgowns and laid them lightly at the foot of the bed. The nightgowns had been hiding 2 9x12 manila envelopes. She handed him one, and he opened it. 100 $100 bills, paper-clipped together in wads of 10 each. "Whose is this? This money belongs to—" He was pointing to the bed, to one side, then the other. "La Signora. Secret money." Rosa was looking down at her belly, her hands, chubby and astonishingly tiny, crossed there like the hands of a child being rebuked. "Always this much? Siempre 10,000? Virtually all his whorehouse Spanish was gone, yet he could still remember the numbers, the prices, the levy imposed. The fact that you could go out and buy it like papaya or pomegranate or a watch or a book, like anything that you wanted enough to part with your hard-earned dough to get it. Cuánto pesos, para qué cosa, etc. Rosa made the gesture to indicate sometimes more, sometimes less. If he could just calm her down long enough to break through to the base instincts. "Where does she get the money?" he asked. "No comprendo." "Is this money she earns at work? In Italiano, lavoro." "No comprendo." "Trabajo." God, it was coming back. Trabajo. How he loved his trabajo. Painting, chipping, and then fucking himself silly on shore. It was just as natural as getting off the ship and going into a bar and having a drink. In no way was it extraordinary, but to me and Ron, it was the most extraordinary thing in the world. You got off the ship and you headed straight for the one thing you had never done before and would never want to stop doing again. "How does Mrs. make her living?" "Que trabajo?" "Odontología. Ella es una dentista." "A dentist? La Signora?" He tapped his front tooth with his fingernail. "Si." Men in and out of the office all day long. Gives them gas, that nitrous oxide. "The other envelope," he said. El otro, por favor." "No money," she replied flatly. There was opposition in her now. Suddenly she looked a little like General Noriega. "No money. En el otro sobre no hay nada." Nothing at all? An empty envelope hidden under 15 nightgowns at the bottom of her bottom drawer? Give me a break, Rosa. The woman was astonished when he concluded with Rosa, but she appeared not to know whether to be more frightened of him or less. Spoken inadvertently enough, her name turned out to be just the thing to resuscitate her uncertainty as to what kind of madman she was dealing with. "Absolutamente nada," she said bravely. "Está vacío, señor. And here she gave way and began to cry. "I'm not going to shoot you. I told you that. You know that." "What are you afraid of?" "No peligro," what the whores used to tell him when he inquired about their health. "Es declared Rosa, sobbing like a child in the crook of her arm. "Es verdad." He didn't know whether to follow his inclination and put a hand out to comfort her, or to appear more ruthless by reaching for the pocket where she thought the pistol was. The main thing was to keep her from screaming again and running for help. His remaining so calm while in a state of tremendous excitement he could not account for. He might not look it, he might never have looked it, but he was really a high-strung fellow, delicate feelings. To be callous quite like this was not in his nature, except with a perpetual drunk. Sabbath did not care to make people suffer beyond the point that he wanted them to suffer. He certainly didn't want to make them suffer any more than made him happy, nor was he ever dishonest more than was pleasant. In this regard, at least, he was much like others. Or was Rosa having him on? He'd bet Rosa was a lot less high-strung than he was. 4 childs, cleaning woman, no English, never enough money, on her knees, crossing herself, praying. All an act to prove what? Why drag in Jesus, who has his own troubles? A nail through either palm you sympathize with when you suffer osteoarthritis in both hands. He had roared with laughter recently, first time since Drenka's death, when Gus told him over the gas pump that his brother-in-law and sister had been in Japan at Christmas, and when they went to shop at the biggest department store in some big city there, first thing they saw up above the entrance was a gigantic Santa Claus hanging from a cross. "Japs don't get it," Gus said. Why should they? Who does? But in Madamascar Falls, Sabbath kept his retort to himself. He had got into difficulty enough explaining to one of Rosanna's fellow teachers that he could take no interest in her specialty, Native American literature, because Native Americans ate treif. She had to consult a Jewish American friend to find out what that meant, but when she did, she let him have it. He hated them all, except Gus. He watched Rosa davening. That's what was bringing out the Jew in him, a Catholic down on the floor, always did. "You finished, get off." Whores can fool you. Cleaning women can fool you. Anybody can fool you. Your mother can fool you. Oh, Sabbath so wanted to live. He thrived on this stuff. Why die? Had his father gone off at dawn to peddle butter and eggs so that both boys should die before their time? Had his impoverished grandparents crossed from Europe in steerage so that a grandson of theirs who had escaped the Jewish miseries should throw away a single fun-filled moment of American life? Why die when these envelopes are hidden away by women beneath their Bergdorf lingerie? There alone was a reason to live to 100. He still had the $10,000 in his hands. Why is Michelle Cowan hiding this money? Whose is it? How did she earn it? With the money he'd had to pay Drenka that first time with Krista, she'd bought the power tools for Matthew. With the hundreds that Louis, the credit card magnate, had slipped into her purse, she bought tchotchkes for the house, ornamental plates, carved napkin rings, antique silver candelabra. To Barrett, the electrician, she gave money, like to stuff a 20 down into his jeans as he was pinching her nipples in their last embrace. He hoped Barrett had saved that money. He might not be fixing shorts for a while. Norman's first wife had been Betty, the high school sweetheart, whom Sabbath no longer remembered. What Michelle looked like he now discovered from the contents of the second envelope. He had once again directed Rosa to take it from the drawer, and hurriedly she obliged when he began to edge his hand toward the pocket in which there was no gun. He'd been looking for pictures in the wrong room, virtual replicas of his pictures of Drenka someone had taken of Michelle. Norman? After 30 years and 3 kids? Unlikely. Besides, if Norman had taken them, why hide them? From Deborah? Best thing for Deborah would be to give her a look at them. Michelle was an extremely slender woman, narrow shoulders, fleshless arms, and straight pole-like legs, rather longish legs, like Nikki's, like Rosanna's, like the legs that before Drenka used to like best to climb. The breasts were a pleasant surprise in one so thin, weighty, sizable, crowned with nipples that came out indigo on the Polaroid film. Maybe she'd painted them. Maybe the photographer had painted them. She wore her black hair tautly pulled back, a flamenco dancer. She's read her Ava Gardner. She, in fact, did resemble the white Cuban women about whom Sabbath used to say to Ron, "They look Jewish, but without the ish." Nose job? Hard to tell. The nose was not the focus of the inquiring photographer's curiosity. The picture Sabbath liked best was the least anatomically detailed. In it, Michelle was wearing nothing but soft brown kid boots widely cuffed at her upper thigh. Elegance and filth, his bread and butter. The other pictures were more or less standard issue, nothing mankind hadn't known since Vesuvius had preserved Pompeii. The edge of a chair on which she was seated in one picture, the stretch of carpet across which she lay in another, the window curtains to which she made love in a third. He could smell the Lysol even from here. But, as he knew from watching Drenka at the Bo Peep, the sleazy motel was a kick too, a kick similar to taking the lover's money, as though he were just a John. After inserting the photographs back into the envelope, he helped Rosa up off the floor and handed her the envelope to return to the drawer. He did the same with the money, counting off the 10 paperclip piles of bills to show her that he hadn't slipped one up his sleeve. Then he lifted the nightgowns off the bed and, holding them in his hands a minute, shockingly, to his surprise, failing to discover in the feel of them sufficient reason to continue living indicated that she should put them back atop the envelopes and shut the drawer. So that's it. That's all. Terminado, as the whores who pushed you off them would succinctly put it the split second after you'd come. He surveyed the whole room now. All so innocent, this Lux I disparaged. Yes, a failure in every department. A handful of fairy tale years and the rest a total loss. He'd hang himself. At sea with his dexterous fingers, he'd been an ace with knots. In this room or Deborah's? He looked for what best to hang himself from. Thick grayish-blue wool carpet, muted, pale plaid wallpaper, 16-foot ceilings, ornamented plaster, pretty pine desk, austere antique armoire, comfortable easy chair in a darker plaid, one tone down from the gray plaid on the upholstered headboard of the king-size bed, ottoman, embroidered throw pillows, cut flowers in crystal vases, huge mirror in mottled pine frame on the wall back of the bed, a 5-bladed ceiling fan hanging from a long stem above the foot of the bed. There it is. Stand up on the bed, tie the rope to the motor. They'd catch sight of him in the mirror. Manhattan south of 71st Street to frame his swinging corpse. An El Greco, tormented figure in the foreground, Toledo and its churches in the background, and my soul seen ascending to Christ in the upper right corner. Rosa will get me in. He held his hands up before her eyes. There were bulging nodes behind each of his cuticles, the ring and little fingers of both hands he could hardly move at all on a morning like this one, and long ago both his thumbs had taken on the shape of spoons. He could imagine how, to a simple mind like Rosa's, his hands looked like the hands of someone bearing a curse. She might even be right. Nobody understands arthritis. "Dolorido?" she asked sympathetically, attentively appraising the deformity of each finger. "Sí, muy dolorido. Repugnante." "No, signor, no, no," even as she continued to examine him as she would a creature in a circus sideshow. "Usted es muy simpática," he told her. It now occurred to him that he and Ron had fucked Yvonne and the pregnant girl in the second whorehouse they'd visited that first night in Havana. What happened when they got off the ship was what happened back then in most of the places. Pimps or runners of some kind were there to urge you to the houses where they wanted to take you. They may have targeted us because we were young kids. The other sailors told them to piss off. So he and Ron were taken to a cuddly, old, decaying place with filthy tiled walls and tiled floors, into a salon practically barren of furniture, and out came a bunch of fat, old women. That's who Rosa reminded him of, the whores in that shithole. Imagine my having the presence of mind 2 months out of Asbury High to say, no thanks. But I did. I said in English, young chickens. So the guy took them to the other place, where they found Yvonne DiCarlo and the pregnant girl, young women who passed off for good-looking in the Cuban marketplace. "You finished? Get off." "Vámonos," he said, and obediently Rosa followed him down the corridor to Deborah's bedroom, which did indeed look as though a thief had had at it. He wouldn't have been surprised to find a mound of warm feces on top of the desk. The savage license taken here astonished even the perpetrator. On Deborah's bed, he seated himself at the edge of the bed while Rosa hung back by the disheveled closet. "I will not tell what you did, Rosa. I will not tell." "No?" "Absolutamente no. Prometto," he indicated with a gesture so painful it nearly made him retch, that it was between the two of them. "Nostro segreto." "Secreto," she said. "Si, secreto." "Me promette?" "Si." He pulled one of Norman's 50s out of his wallet and motioned for her to come and take it. "No," said Rosa. "I won't tell. You won't tell. I won't tell you showed the Signora's money, the doctor's money, and you won't tell you showed me her photographs, her pictures. Comprende? Everything we forget. How do you say to forget in Espanol? To forget," he tried to indicate with a hand something flying out of his head. Oh, volare. The Via Veneto, the whores of the Via Veneto, as flavorful as the perfumed peaches he'd buy in Trastevere, 6 for a dime's worth of lira. "Olvidar? Olvidar todos," She came over and, to his delight, took the money. He clutched her hand with his deformed fingers while, with the other hand, he produced a second 50. No, signor. Donacion, he said humbly, holding on to her. He remembered Donacion, all right. In the days of the romance run, each time you went back to the same whorehouses, you brought nylons to your favorite girls. The guy said, "You like her? Give her a little Donacion. Pick her up something, and when you come back, you'll give it to her. Whether she remembers you or not is another matter. She'll be glad to take the nylons anyhow." The names of those girls and the dozens and dozens of brothels and the dozens and dozens of places, there must have been a Rosa somewhere. Rosa, he murmured softly, trying to pull her so that she would slide between his legs. ¿Para usted de parte mía? No, gracias. Por favor. No. De mí para ti. A glare that was all blackness, but that looked to be the go-ahead signal anyway. You win, I lose. Do it and get it over with. On Deborah's bed. Here, he said, and managed to wedge the mass of her lower torso between his widespread legs. He grasps the sword. He eyes the bull. El momento de verdad. Take it. Without speaking, Rosa did as she was told. Secure it with the third 50, or was the agreement reached? Quanto dinero? Para qué cosa? To be back there, to be 17 in Havana and ramming it in. 20 y no te pavones. That crone, that old bitch, always sticking her head in my room and trying to hurry me up. A madam's hard eye, heavy makeup, a butcher's thick shoulders, and after only 15 minutes, the scornful harangue of the slave driver. 20 y no te pavones. 1946. Come and don't show off. Look, he said sadly to her. The room, the chaos. She turned her head. Si, chaos. She breathed deeply. Resignation? Disgust? If he slipped her the third 50, would she just slide to her knees as easily as when she prayed? Interesting if she prayed and blew him both at once. Happens a lot in Latin countries. I made this chaos, Sabbath told her, and when he rubbed the tip of a spoon-shaped thumb across the pock-marked cheeks, she offered no objection. Mais por qué? Because I lost something. I could not find something I lost. Comprende? Comprendo. I lost my glass eye. Ojo artificial. This one. He drew her a little closer and pointed to his right eye. He began to smell her armpits first, then the rest. Something familiar. It is not lavender. Bahia. This isn't a real eye. This is a glass eye. Vidrio? Sí. Este ojo de vidrio. Glass eye. Glass eye, she repeated. Glass eye, that's it. I lost it. I took it out last night to go to sleep, as I usually do. But because I wasn't at home in mi casa, I didn't put it in the usual place. You follow all this? I am a guest here, amigo de Norman Cowan, aquí para de funeral de Señor Gelman. No. Sí. El Señor Gelman está muerto? I'm afraid so. Oh. I know, but that's how I come to be here. If he hadn't died, we two would never have met. Anyhow, I took out my glass eye to sleep, but when I woke up, I couldn't remember where I'd put it. I had to get to the funeral, but could I go to a funeral without an eye? Understand me? I was trying to find my eye, so I opened all the drawers, the desk, the closet. Feverishly, he pointed around the room as she nodded and nodded, her mouth no longer grimly set, but rather innocently ajar. To find the fucking eye, where it had gone, looking everywhere, going crazy, loco demente. Now she was beginning to laugh at the scene he was so slapstickishly playing out for her. No, she said, tapping him disapprovingly on the thigh. No, loco. See, and guess where it was, Rosa. Guess. Donde was the ojo? Sure, a joke was on the way. She began shaking her head from side to side. No sé. Here he hopped energetically off the bed, and while she now sat on the bed to watch him, He began to mime for her how, before going to sleep, he popped the eye out of his head, and after looking and finding nowhere to put it, and fearful that someone came in and saw it on Deborah's desk, say, would be horrified, this too he mimed for her, making her laugh a beguiling ripple of a girlish laugh. He just dropped it into his trouser pocket. Then he brushed his teeth, showed her that, washed his face, showed her that, and came back into the bedroom to undress and stupidly, estupido, he cried, knocking his poor fists against the side of his head and not even stopping to acknowledge the pain, hung his trousers on a pants hanger in Deborah's closet. He showed her a pants hanger on which were hanging a pair of Deborah's wide blue silk pants. Then he showed her how he had turned his pants upside down to hang them in the closet, and how, of course, the ojo had fallen out of the pocket and into one of her running shoes on the floor. Can you beat that? Into the kid's zapato. My eye! She was laughing so hard she had to squeeze herself with her arms as though to prevent her belly from splitting open. If you're going to fuck her, just step up to the bed and fuck her now, man. On Deborah's bed, the fattest woman you will have ever fucked. One last enormous woman, and then with a clear conscience you can hang yourself. Life won't have been for nothing. Here, he said, and taking one of her hands in his own, drew it toward his right eye. Did you ever feel a glass eye before? Go ahead, he said. Be gentle, Rosa, but go ahead. Feel it. You may not have this chance again. Most men are ashamed of their infirmities. Not me, I love 'em. Make me feel alive. Touch it. She shrugged uncertainly. See? Don't be afraid. It's all part of the deal. Touch it. Touch it gently. She gasped, drawing in her breath as she laid the padded tip of her tiny pointing finger lightly on the surface of his right eye. Glass, he said. 100% glass. Feel real, she said, and, indicating that it wasn't so spooky as she first had feared, looked eager to take another poke at the thing. Contrary to appearances, she was not a slow learner, and she was game. They're all game if you take your time and use your brains and aren't 64 years old. The girls, all the girls. It was killing to think about. Of course it feels real, he replied. That is because it's a good one, the best, mucho dinero. Life's last fuck. Working since she was 9, no school, no plumbing, no money, a pregnant, illiterate Mexican out of some slum somewhere, or up from peasant poverty, and weighing about the same as yourself. It couldn't have ended otherwise. Final proof that life is perfect, knows where it's going every inch of the way. No, human life must not be extinguished. No one could come up with anything like it again. Rosa, will you be a good soul and clean the room? You are a good soul. You weren't trying to fool me down there, praying to Jesus. You were just asking his forgiveness for your leading me into temptation. You just swung right into it the way you were taught. I admire that. I wouldn't mind somebody like Jesus to turn to. Maybe he could get me some Voltaren without a prescription. Isn't that one of his specialties? He didn't know precisely what he was saying because his blood began draining into his boots. No comprendo, but she wasn't frightened. For while smiling at her, he was barely speaking above a whisper and had weakly settled back down onto the bed. Make order, Rosa. Make regularidad. Okay, she said, and began zealously to pick Deborah's things up off the floor instead of having to do what this madman with the white beard and the crazy fingers and the glass eye, and more than likely a loaded pistol, expected for his 2 lousy 50s. Thank you, dear, said Sabbath woozily. You've saved my life. And then, while he was fortunately anchored to the edge of the bed, the vertigo took him by the ears, a shot of bile surged into his throat, and he felt as he had riding the waves as a kid after catching a big one too late, and it broke over him like the chandelier at Asbury's palatial Mayfair, the great chandelier that, in dreams he'd been having for half a century ever since Morty was killed in the war, was tearing loose from its moorings and falling on top of his brother and him as they sat there innocently, side by side, watching The Wizard of Oz. He was dying. He had given himself a heart attack by going all out for Rosa's amusement. Final performance. Will not be held over. Puppet master and prick conclude career. Rosa was kneeling next to the bed now, stroking his scalp with one of her warm little hands. "Sick?" she asked. Low self-esteem. "Want doctor here?" "No, ma'am. Hands hurt, that's all." Did they? He assumed at first the pain-riddled fingers were causing him to shake. Then the teeth began to chatter as they had the evening before, and he had suddenly to fight with all his fortitude to prevent himself from throwing up. "Mother?" No answer. Her silent act again. Or was she not there? "Mama? Su madre? Donde, señor?" "Muerto." "Hoy?" "Si, this morning. Questo Aurora." Aurora? Italian again. Italy again. The Via Veneto, the peaches, the girls. "Ah, signor, no, no." She kindly supported his hairy cheeks with her hands, and when she pulled him to her mountainous bosom, he let her. He'd let her take the pistol out of his pocket if he had one and shoot him right between the eyes. She could plead self-defense, rape. He had a harassment record a mile long already. They'd string him up by his feet outside now. Rosanna would see that they did it the way they did it to Mussolini, and cut off his prick for good measure, like that woman who'd used a kitchen knife 12 inches long to slice the cock off her sleeping husband, an ex-Marine and a violent bastard, for fucking her up the ass down in Virginia. "You wouldn't do that to me, darling, would you?" "I would," said R. obligingly, "if you had one." She and all her progressive friends in the valley couldn't stop talking about this case. Rosanna didn't seem anything like so upset by it as she was by circumcision. Jewish barbarism, she told him after attending the bris of a friend's grandson in Boston. Indefensible, disgusting. I wanted to walk out. Yet the woman who'd cut off her husband's cock seemed, from the excitement with which Rosanna spoke of her, to have become a heroine. Surely, Sabbath suggested, she could have registered her protest another way. How? Dial 911? Try it and see where it gets you. No, not 911. That's not justice. No, stick something unpleasant up his ass. One of his pipes, say, if he happens to be a smoker. Maybe even one that was lit. If he is not a smoker, then she could shove a frying pan up his ass. A rectum for a rectum, Exodus 21:24. But cutting his dick off, really, Rosie, life isn't just a series of pranks. We are no longer schoolgirls. Life is not just giggling and passing notes. We are women now. This is a serious business. Remember how Nora does it in A Doll's House? She doesn't cut off Torvald's dick. She walks out the fucking door. I don't believe you necessarily have to be a 19th century Norwegian to walk out a door. Doors continue to exist. Even in America, they are still more plentiful than knives. Only doors take guts to walk out of. Tell me, have you ever wanted to cut my dick off in the middle of the night as an amusing way of settling scores? Yes, often. But why? What did I ever do, or fail to do, to give you an idea like that? I don't believe I ever once entered your anus without a prescription from the doctor and written permission from you. Forget it, she said. I don't know that it's a good idea for me to forget it now that I know it. You really had thoughts about taking a knife, a scissors, and cutting off my cock? I was drunk. I was angry. Oh, that was just Chardonnay talking tough back in the old days. So what about today? What would you like to cut off now that you're in sobriety? What does Bill W. suggest? I offer my hands. They're no fucking good anyway. I offer my throat. What is the overpowering symbolism of the penis for you people? Keep this up and you'll make Freud look good. I don't understand you and your friends. You stage a sit-down strike in the middle of Town Street every time the road crew goes near the limb of a sacred maple tree. You throw your bodies in front of every twig. But when it comes to this unfortunate incident, you're all gung-ho. If the woman had gone outside and sawed down his favorite elm for revenge, this guy might have a chance with you all. Too bad he wasn't a tree, one of those irreplaceable redwoods. The Sierra Club would have been out in force. She would have had her head handed to her by Joan Baez. A redwood? You mutilated a redwood? You're as bad as Spiro Agnew. You're all so merciful and tender against the death penalty, even for serial killers. Judging poetry contests for degenerate cannibals in maximum security prisons. How could you be so horrified about napalming the communist enemy in Southeast Asia and so happy about this ex-Marine having his dick cut off right here in the USA? Cut mine off, Rosanna Kavanaugh, and I'll bet you 10 to 1, 100 to 1, you're back on the booze tomorrow. Cutting off a dick isn't as easy as you think. It isn't just snip, 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 like you're darning a sock. It isn't just chop, 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 like you're mincing an onion. It isn't an onion, it's a human dick. It's full of blood. Remember Lady Macbeth? They didn't have AA in Scotland, so the poor woman went off her rocker. Who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him? Here's the smell of the blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. She flips out. Lady Powerhouse Macbeth. So what's going to happen to you? That woman in Virginia is a heroine, as well as a despicable human being. But you don't have the guts, darling. You're just a school teacher in the sticks. We're talking about evil, Rosie. The worst you could do in life was become a wino. What the fuck's a wino? A dime a dozen. Any drunk can become a drunk, but not everybody can cut off a dick. I don't doubt that this splendid woman has given encouragement to dozens of other splendid women all around the country, but personally, I don't think you've got anything like what it takes to get down there and do it. You'd vomit if you had to swallow my cum. You told me that long ago. Well, how do you think you'd like to perform surgery on your loving husband without an anesthetic? Why not wait and see, said Rosanna with a little smile. No, let's not wait. I'm not going to live forever. I'll be 70 the day after tomorrow, and then you'll have missed your big chance to prove how courageous you are. Cut it off, Rosanna. Pick a night, any night. Cut it off. I dare you. And wasn't that what he had run from and why he was here? There was a mammoth scissors in the utility closet. There was a much smaller scissors shaped like a heron in her sewing kit, and an ordinary-sized one with orange plastic handles in her middle desk drawer. There was a hedge clipper out in her potting shed. For weeks, ever since this case had begun to obsess her, he had been thinking of throwing them all in the woods up at Battle Mountain when he went at night to visit Drenka's grave. Then he remembered that her art classes were full of scissors. Every kid had a pair for cutting and pasting. And then the jury in Virginia declares this woman innocent on grounds of temporary insanity. She went crazy for 2 minutes, just about how long it took Lewis to knock out Schmeling in that second fight. Barely enough time to cut it off and throw it away, but she managed. She did it. Shortest insanity in world history. A record. The old 1-2 and that's it. Rosanna and the peaceniks were on the phone all morning. They thought it was a great decision. That was enough warning for him. Great day for women's liberation, but a black day for the Marine Corps and Sabbath. He would never sleep in that house of scissors again. And who was his comforter now? She was cradling his head as though she intended to give him suck. Pobre hombre, she muttered. Pobre niño, pobre madre. He was weeping, to Rosa's surprise, out of both eyes. She continued nonetheless to soothe his sorrows, talking softly in Spanish and stroking the scalp or the pitch-black hair that strikingly offset the hot green needles that were his eyes, used to grow in profusion back when he was a 17-year-old kid in a sailor's cap and everything in life led to pussy. "How do you have one eyes?" asked Rosa, gently rocking him to and fro. "Por qué?" "La guerre," he moaned. "It cry? Glass eye?" "I told you, it wasn't cheap." And under the spell of her fleshiness, pressing against her pungency, his nose sinking deeper and deeper into the deep, Sabbath felt as though he were porous, as though the last that was left of the whole concoction that had been a self was running out now, drop by drop. He wouldn't need to knot a rope. He would just drip his way into death until he was dry and gone. So then, this had been his existence. What conclusion was to be drawn? Any? Who had come to the surface in him was inexorably himself, nobody else. Take it or leave it. "Rosa," he wept. "Rosa, Mama, Drenka, Nicky, Rosanna, Yvonne." "Shh, pobrecito, shh. Ladies, if I have put my life to an improper use, no comprendo, pobrecito," she said. And so he shut up, because neither really did he. He was fairly sure that he was half faking the whole collapse. Sabbath's indecent theater. 2. To be or not to be. Sabbath hit the street with the intention of spending the hours before Link's funeral playing Rip Van Winkle. The idea revived him. He looked the part and had been out of it longer even than Rip. RVW merely missed the revolution. From what Sabbath had been hearing over the years, he had missed the transformation of New York into a place utterly antagonistic to sanity and civil life. A city that by the 1990s had brought to perfection the art of killing the soul. If you had a living soul, and Sabbath no longer made any such claim for himself, it could die here in 1,000 different ways at any hour of the day or night. And that was not to speak of unmetaphorical death, of citizens as prey, of everyone from the helpless elderly to the littlest of school children infected with fear. Nothing in the whole city, not even the turbines of Con Ed, as mighty and galvanic as fear. New York was a city completely gone wrong, where nothing but the subway was subterranean anymore. It was a city where you could obtain, sometimes with no trouble at all, sometimes at considerable expense, the worst of everything. In New York, the good old days, the old way of life, was thought to have existed no further than 3 years back. The intensification of corruption and violence and the turnover in crazy behavior being that rapid. A showcase for degradation, overflowing with the overflow of slums, prisons, and mental hospitals of at least 2 hemispheres, tyrannized by criminals, maniacs, and bands of kids who'd overturn the world for a pair of sneakers. A city where the few who bothered to consider life seriously knew themselves to be surviving in the teeth of everything inhuman, or all too human. One shuddered to think that all that was abhorrent in the city disclosed the lineaments of mass mankind as it truly longed to be. Now, Sabbath did not swallow these stories he continually heard characterizing New York as hell. First, because every great city is hell. Second, because if you weren't interested in the gaudier abominations of mankind, what were you doing there in the first place? And third, because the people he heard telling these stories, the wealthy of Madamascar Falls, the tiny professional elite, and the elderly who'd retired to their summer homes there, were the last people on earth you'd believe about anything. Unlike his neighbors, if Sabbath could be said to consider anyone, anywhere, a neighbor, he did not naturally shrink from the worst in people, beginning with himself. Despite his having been preserved in a northern icebox for the bulk of his life, during recent years he had been thinking that he, for one, could perhaps be something other than repelled by the city's daily terrors. He might even have left Madamascar Falls and Rosie to return to New York long ago if it had not been for his sidekicker, and for the feeling still springing from Nicky's disappearance, and for the silly destiny that had been chosen for him instead by his tiresome superiority and threadbare paranoia. Though his paranoia, he observed, shouldn't be exaggerated. It was never the poisoned spearhead of his thinking, never on the truly grand scale, needing absolutely nothing to unleash it. Certainly by now it was no more than a sort of everyman's paranoia, quarrelsome enough to rise to the bait, but by and large frazzled and sick of itself. Meanwhile, he was trembling again, and without the comfort of Rosa's pungency and its nostalgic meaning. It seemed that once the thing had taken hold as it had earlier in Deborah's ransacked room, he was hard put to extinguish by an act of will the desire not to be alive any longer. It was walking along with him, his companion, as he headed toward the subway station. Though he hadn't walked them for decades, he saw nothing at all of those streets, so busy as he was in staying abreast of his wish to die. He marched in unison with it step by step, keeping time to an infantry chant he'd had drummed into his head by the black cadre at Fort Dix when he was there training to be a killer of communists after coming back from sea. You had a good home, but you left. You're right. You had a good home, but you left. You're right. Sound off 1, 2, sound off 3, 4, sound off 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. The desire not to be alive any longer accompanied Sabbath right on down the station stairway, and after Sabbath purchased a token, continued through the turnstile clinging to his back. And when he boarded the train, it sat in his lap, facing him, and began to tick off on Sabbath's crooked fingers the many ways it could be sated. This little piggy slit its wrists. This little piggy used a dry-cleaning bag. This little piggy took sleeping pills. And this little piggy born by the ocean ran all the way out in the waves and drowned. It took Sabbath and the desire not to be alive any longer just the length of the ride downtown to together compose an obituary. Morris Sabbath, puppeteer, 64, dies. Morris Mickey Sabbath, a puppeteer and sometime theatrical director who made his little mark and then vanished from the off Broadway scene to hide like a hunted criminal in New England, died Tuesday on the sidewalk outside 115 Central Park West. He fell from a window on the 18th floor. The cause of death was suicide, said Rosa Complicata, whom Mr. Sabbath sodomized moments before taking his life. Ms. Complicata is the spokesperson for the family. According to Ms. Complicata, he had given her two $50 bills to perform perverse acts before his jumping out the window. But he no have heart prick, said the heavyset spokesperson in tears. Suspended sentence. Mr. Sabbath began his career as a street performer in 1953. Observers of the entertainment world identify Sabbath as the missing link between the respectable 50s and the rambunctious 60s. A small cult developed around his indecent theater where Mr. Sabbath used fingers in place of puppets to represent his ribald characters. He was prosecuted on charges of obscenity in 1956, and though he was found guilty and fined, his sentence of 30 days was suspended. Had he served the time, it might have straightened him out. Under the auspices of Norman Cowan and Lincoln Gelman for Gelman Obituary, see B7, Column 3, Mr. Sabbath directed a notably insipid King Lear in 1959. Nikki Kantarakis was praised by our critic for her Cordelia, but Mr. Sabbath's performance as Lear was labeled megalomaniacal suicide. Ripe tomatoes had been handed to all ticket holders as they entered the theater, and by the end of the evening Mr. Sabbath seemed to relish his besmirchment. Pig or perfectionist? The RADA trained Miss Katarakis, star of the Bowery Basement Players and the director's wife, mysteriously disappeared from their home in November 1964. Her fate remains unknown, though murder has never been ruled out. The pig Flaubert murdered Louise Colette, said Countess Duplicitas, the aristocrat's feminist, in a telephone interview today. Countess Duplicitas is best known for fictionalizing biography. She is currently fictionalizing the biography of Miss Kantarakis. The pig Fitzgerald murdered Zelda, the Countess continued. The pig Hughes murdered Sylvia Plath, and the pig Sabbath murdered Nikki. It's all there, in all the different ways he murdered her, in Nikki, the destruction of an actress by a pig. Members of the original Bowery Basement Players contacted today agreed that Mr. Sabbath was merciless in his direction of his wife. They were all hoping that she would kill him, and were disappointed when she disappeared without even having tried. Mr. Sabbath's friend and co-producer, Norman Cowan, whose daughter, Deborah, a student in underclothing at Brown, played a starring role in the extravaganza Farewell to a Half-Century of Masturbation, elaborately staged by Mr. Sabbath in the hours just before he leaped to his death, tells another story. Mickey was a genuinely nice person, Mr. Cowan commented. Never gave anybody any trouble. A bit of a loner, but always with a kind word for everyone. First whore, mean. Mr. Sabbath trained in the whorehouses of Central and South America, as well as in the Caribbean, before establishing himself as a puppeteer in Manhattan. He never used a rubber and miraculously never contracted VD. Mr. Sabbath often recounted the story of his first whore. The one I chose was very interesting, he once told a person sitting next to him on the subway. I'll never forget her as long as I live. You wouldn't forget your first one anyway. I chose her because she looked like Yvonne DiCarlo, the actress, the movie actress. Anyway, here I am, shaking like a leaf. This is old Havana. I remember how marvelous and romantic that was, decaying streets with balconies. Very first time. Never been laid in my life. So there I was with Yvonne. We both started getting undressed. I remember sitting in a chair by the door. The first thing and the most lasting thing of all is that she had red underwear, a red brassiere and underpants, and that was fantastic. The next thing I remember is being on top of her, and the next thing I remember is that it was all over and she said, "Get off me," slightly mean. "Get off." Now this doesn't happen every time, but since it was my first time, I thought it did and got off. "You finished? Get off." There are some nasty types, even among whores. I'll never forget it. I thought, okay, what do I care? But it did strike me as unfriendly and even mean. How did I know, a kid from the boondocks, that 1 out of 10 would be mean and tough like that, however pretty? Did nothing for Israel. Not long after the alleged murder of his first wife, Mr. Sabbath made his way to the remote mountain village where he was supported until his death by a second wife, who dreamed for years of cutting off his cock and then taking sanctuary in her abused women's group. During his 3 decades in hiding, aside from virtually making a prostitute of Miss Drenka Balic, a Croatian-American neighbor, he seems to have worked on little else but a 5-minute puppet adaptation of the hopelessly insane Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. In his 50s, he developed erosive osteoarthritis in both hands, involving the distal interphalangeal joints and the proximal interphalangeal joints, with relative sparing of the metacarpal phalangeal joints. The result was radical instability and function loss from persistent pain and stiffness and progressive deformity. Owing to his prolonged consideration of the advantages of arthrodesis against the advantages of implant arthroplasty, his wife became an expert in Chardonnay. The osteoarthritis provided a wonderful pretext for being even more bitter about everything and devoting his entire day to thinking up ways to degrade Mrs. Balic. He is survived by the ghost of his mother, Yetta of Beth Something or Other Cemetery, Neptune, New Jersey, who haunted him unceasingly during the last year of his life. His brother, Lieutenant Morton Sabbath, was shot down over the Philippines during the Second World War. Yetta Sabbath never got over it. It is from his mother that Mr. Sabbath inherited his own ability never to get over anything. Also surviving is his wife, Rosanna of Madamasca Falls, with whom he was shacked up on the night that Miss Cantarakis disappeared, or was murdered by him and her body disposed of. Mr. Sabbath is believed by Countess Duplicitas to have coerced Mrs. Sabbath, the former Rosanna Kavanaugh, into being an accomplice to the crime, thus initiating her plunge into alcoholism. Mr. Sabbath did nothing for Israel.